You have told us just how much you value the support of friends and family.
It has been an incredibly tough couple of months for our entire family.
It started as a quiet change in a royal hallway, allegedly ordered by Queen Camilla. But removing Princess Charlotte's portrait was a step too far for Prince William. What happened next left the palace buzzing. Watch until the end and subscribe for more secrets from behind the gilded doors. It began with stillness, no memo, no staff briefing, no polite email about a refresh, just a morning at Clarence's house when the East Gallery seemed to breathe differently. Something beloved was missing, and the air carried it. The spot where a portrait had quietly warmed the corridor was now bare. The piece in question, a tender image from Princess Charlotte's 8th birthday, had been a favorite among those who walked the route each day. People lingered by it. They spoke about the poise in her eyes, the spark that felt older than the years beneath it. Then one day, the frame wasn't there. No replacement, no card explaining a rotation. Nothing but pale wall where color used to live. An aide noticed first. She paused, stepped back and checked the neighboring frames. Pictures of George and Louis holding their places. Her heart dropped a little. In residences like this, walls have rules. Frames are choices. Positioning matters. Absence says as much as presence. She didn't raise an alarm. She told no one in authority. Instead, a whisper formed the way whispers always do. Soft, almost apologetic, yet impossible to ignore. Had the portrait been archived, loaned for conservation, quietly retired? The lack of any note turned small questions into heavier ones. By midday, the hush had a heartbeat. Staff who had served through different reigns traded glances that said, "We've seen this pattern before. Photographs here aren't just decoration, they're language." And that empty rectangle read like a sentence with a missing name. No one rushed to assign blame. It was safer to call it a rearrangement. But even a careful person could see what the gallery now suggested. The boys remained, Charlotte was gone. Whether clerical, curatorial, or something more deliberate, the change felt intentional, and it refused to be invisible. Questions lingered behind every step. In royal homes, a portrait is never just a picture. It's a silent ambassador. Every frame on the wall is chosen for a reason. To show unity, to celebrate lineage, to remind anyone who visits where the heart of the family lies. For the staff, these portraits were more than decoration. They were the visual script of the monarchy, each one placed with precision to tell a story. That's why Charlotte's 8th birthday portrait had meant something. It wasn't hung in a corner or tucked behind a doorway. It stood proudly beside her brothers, George and Louis, forming a perfect trio. Together, they represented the next chapter of the royal family. Equal in presence, equal in belonging. When one piece of that trio disappeared, the message shifted instantly. Suddenly, the visual balance was broken. Visitors might not consciously notice, but those who understood palace optics would. The absence pulled at the eye like a missing tooth in an otherwise perfect smile. Long-serving attendants remembered past changes that had carried unspoken meanings. A frame moved out of sight here. A photographer retired earlier than expected there. Often the reasoning was wrapped in phrases like seasonal rotation or updating the collection. But the veterans knew better. In a place where nothing is left to chance, even the smallest adjustments are deliberate. That's why Charlotte's missing portrait stung. It wasn't just her image being removed. It was her place in the visual narrative of the palace. For a little girl who already carried a connection to the legacy of Diana, whose smile had warmed more than one chilly hallway, this absence didn't feel like housekeeping. It felt like a message. And messages in a house built on image are never accidental. The first person to speak about it openly, though only behind closed doors, was Eleanor, a housekeeper who had worked with the Wales family for over a decade. Eleanor wasn't one for gossip. In fact, her quiet loyalty had made her a trusted presence in rooms where few were allowed. But this time, the silence didn't sit right. She had been in the East Gallery that very morning, dusting along the baseboards, when she saw it happen. 2 aides, one junior and one senior, approached the wall. They didn't make small talk. They didn't smile. They lifted Charlotte's portrait from its hook with careful hands, wrapped it in felt, and carried it away. There was no ceremony, no explanation. Just efficiency. Eleanor had seen portraits move before, but always with some sort of protocol. An art conservator might arrive. A note would be made in the day's log. This time, nothing. Just the quiet removal of a child's face from the palace walls. She kept working, but the image stayed with her. The bright curls, the self-assured smile, the blue birthday dress. She remembered Charlotte racing through the Balmoral gardens, chasing butterflies and laughing so hard she had to stop to catch her breath. That same little girl was now missing from a gallery that told the story of her family. When Eleanor finally spoke, it was to a friend she trusted, another staff member stationed at Kensington Palace. What began as casual conversation took a turn when her voice caught. "They removed her," she said. "The picture's gone." The friend thought she was joking. Eleanor's answer was short and heavy. "I wish I was." From there, the whisper moved like water through the cracks of the household. One footman passed it to another. A senior attendant, known to be loyal to William, heard the account and didn't dismiss it. Everyone knew Eleanor wouldn't invent something like this. What no one knew yet was why. By the end of the day, the whisper had traveled far from the East Gallery. It slipped from one private conversation to another, never loud, never reckless. Just steady, like a thread weaving its way through the fabric of the royal households. The friend Eleanor confided in at Kensington Palace passed the story along to a colleague she trusted implicitly. That colleague, in turn, shared it with a senior advisor who had been around long enough to understand the weight of such changes. This wasn't idle chatter about floral arrangements or menu adjustments. It was about the removal of a single portrait. And in a place like this, that could mean more than anyone on the outside might believe. The advisor faced a choice: pass the information up the chain immediately or hold it until there was more clarity. Alerting Camilla's team would have been the most direct route, but it also risked shutting the matter down before anyone else could address it. Instead, the advisor quietly sent the message to a long-standing contact at Kensington, someone trusted by the Prince and Princess of Wales. When that call was made, the words were simple but carried an edge. "There's been a change at Clarence House. Charlotte's portrait is gone." Orders came from the very top. The person on the other end didn't respond right away. They knew better than to jump to conclusions, but they also knew how these things worked. In royal circles, objects don't disappear without a reason. And if that reason was personal rather than practical, it could set off a chain of quiet but significant consequences. By the time the evening light faded over Kensington Palace, the message had found its way to the person it mattered to most: Prince William. It was late at Kensington Palace when the note arrived. William had been in his study, the soft shuffle of papers and the muted ticking of the clock marking the end of a long day. A discreet knock came at the door. One of his most trusted aides stepped in, holding a folded piece of paper. "This came from someone who thought you should know," the aide said quietly, placing it on the desk before stepping back. William unfolded it. The handwriting was familiar, steady, deliberate. Eleanor's note wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. It stated plainly what she had witnessed. Charlotte's portrait at Clarence House had been removed under the Queen Consort's instructions. He read it once, then again, then a third time, his eyes steady but his mind sharpening with each pass. On the outside, his expression didn't change. Inside, though, a storm had begun to form. For William, this wasn't just about a picture. It wasn't even just about Charlotte. It was about something older, something that reached back into his own childhood. Memories of changes made without warning, of people being pushed quietly out of view, of legacies that were too often softened or rearranged to suit someone else's comfort. He set the note down, fingers resting on the desk's edge. This wasn't the moment for outrage. In the palace, emotion could be a weapon turned against you. What was needed now was clarity. And facts. Within minutes, he summoned his private secretary. "I want every decision about that portrait documented," he said. "Names, dates, the exact chain of instruction, nothing left out." The order was given, and the process began quietly. No calls to the press, no public statements. Just a deliberate gathering of information, piece by piece. Later that evening, William found Catherine in the sitting room. She already knew. The whispers had reached her earlier. Her face was calm, but the stillness in her eyes was telling. "They've crossed a line," William said simply. "She's not a decoration. She's our daughter." Catherine didn't argue. She didn't need to. In that shared silence, the decision was made. This wouldn't be ignored. The next morning, Clarence House felt unusually still. Staff went about their work with extra care. Doors opened more quietly. Footsteps softened on the carpet. Even without knowing the details, they could sense when something was brewing. When William's car pulled up to the private entrance, there were no cameras, no entourage, no formal announcement. He stepped out alone, coat buttoned, pace measured. It had been years since he'd arrived at Clarence House without it being scheduled. That alone made people take notice. He moved through the corridors with purpose, nodding politely but not stopping for conversation. The destination was clear in his mind, the white drawing room, where Queen Camilla often reviewed her weekly charity briefings. A footman entered first, speaking in a low voice. "The Prince of Wales is here." alone. Camilla looked up from her papers, her surprise brief but visible. She rose, smoothing her expression into the polished welcome she'd mastered over decades. But this time, the warmth met a wall. William didn't sit. He didn't remove his coat. Standing before her, he asked one question, his voice calm but carrying weight. Why was Charlotte's portrait removed? The pause that followed was long enough to notice. Finally, Camilla answered with a tone of practiced ease. It was a minor adjustment. The space was being refreshed. William didn't look away. George and Louis are still there, only Charlotte's was taken down. It wasn't meant to offend, she replied. It was a matter of visual balance. He stepped closer, his voice still even but sharper now. She's a child, not an aesthetic. The air in the room seemed to tighten. Camilla tried again, leaning on reason. These things can be sensitive. Public perception, how the press might interpret. Public perception, William interrupted, or personal resentment? Let's not pretend this is about art. This is about legacy, and you do not get to decide who belongs in this family. Her expression stayed composed, but there was no ready response. William turned toward the door, pausing just long enough to leave his final words. Restore the portrait publicly, or I will, and I won't stop there. He walked out without another glance. The silence he left behind was heavier than any raised voice could have been. Back at Adelaide Cottage, the atmosphere was calm on the surface, but Catherine carried the weight of what had unfolded. She had spent the day with the children, making sure their routine stayed untouched by the undercurrents moving through the palace. Charlotte laughed in the garden, played with her brothers, and talked excitedly about a new drawing she wanted to finish. Catherine made sure she didn't hear a word about the portrait. Some matters, especially ones rooted in the politics of the household, were better kept far from a child's mind. But Catherine felt it, that quiet bruise of knowing someone had tried to diminish her daughter's place, even if only symbolically. When William returned that evening, his expression said enough. He found Catherine in the garden, kneeling beside Charlotte as they arranged freshly picked flowers for the kitchen table. Charlotte skipped off to fetch more blooms, leaving her parents a moment alone. Did she admit it? Catherine asked softly, without looking away from the flowers. William nodded once. She called it a design decision. I called it what it was. Catherine's hands stilled over the stems. She's a child, William. Our child. She looks for herself in those halls. Her voice wavered, but only slightly. She won't be erased, William said. Not while we're here. That night, after the children were asleep, Catherine went to her private office. She opened a drawer and pulled out a small stack of Charlotte's drawings, bright, playful sketches of castles, pets, and family moments. Beneath them, she found a printed copy of the missing portrait. She held it for a long moment, her thumb brushing over Charlotte's smile. Then she turned the frame over and in neat handwriting wrote on the back, "You will never be forgotten." Instead of tucking it away again, she placed it beside the fireplace in their home, somewhere Charlotte could see it in the morning. Not in a grand gallery, but in the place that mattered most, among the family who loved her without condition. The reinstatement didn't arrive with public announcements or dramatic headlines. Instead, it came in the way so many palace shifts do, quietly, but with unmistakable intent. On a drizzly Thursday morning, a royal art conservator was spotted entering Clarence House through a side entrance. This wasn't the usual team of junior curators swapping seasonal displays. Flanking the conservator were two senior aides, the kind of presence reserved for matters that carried weight. Within hours, the portrait of Princess Charlotte was back, but it hadn't simply been returned to its old spot in the East Gallery. It now hung in a far more prominent location, the Grand Staircase. This was a place no visitor could miss, a route walked by dignitaries, family members, and staff on their way to the most formal rooms in the residence. The familiar image, Charlotte in her blue birthday dress, her smile steady and confident, looked the same, but the presentation was different. The frame had been replaced with an ornate gilded one, slightly larger, drawing the eye instantly. At the bottom, a small brass plaque gleamed with fresh engraving. Word spread quickly among those in the know. A source inside Clarence House quietly confirmed what many suspected. The reinstallation came at the direct instruction of the Prince of Wales. The phrasing used internally was that there had been an internal family clarification. In palace language, that was as close to a line in the sand as it gets. Later that afternoon, Camilla passed the staircase. She paused, taking in the portrait and the plaque. Those nearby noticed she lingered longer than usual, but she said nothing. Whatever her thoughts, the decision had been made, and the portrait was staying. When the portrait was back in place, the news eventually made its way to Kensington Palace. William and Catherine decided Charlotte should hear it directly from them, not in passing from someone else. One quiet afternoon, Catherine sat with her daughter on the sofa in the family room. She took Charlotte's hand and began in the gentlest way possible. "Do you remember that photo from your birthday? The one in the blue dress?" Charlotte nodded, smiling at the memory. "Well," Catherine continued, "it's back on the wall at the other house. Sometimes grown-ups make decisions that don't make much sense, but love has a way of making things right again." Charlotte tilted her head. "Why did they take it down?" Catherine hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Maybe they forgot how special you are," she said softly. "But your father reminded them." For a moment, Charlotte just thought about it. Then she said, "I want to see it one day, not to be famous, just to know I'm there." Catherine smiled, her eyes warming. "You are there, sweetheart, and you always will be." The conversation ended there, but Catherine knew her daughter would carry the moment quietly, tucking it away the way children do when they're beginning to understand the world. And when Charlotte eventually saw that portrait again, it wouldn't just be a picture on a wall. It would be proof that she mattered, and that someone had stood up for her place. It didn't take long for the outside world to notice. Even without an official statement, the return of the portrait caught the eye of those who watched the royal family closely. One morning, a tabloid ran side-by-side photographs, one from the weeks when the portrait was missing, showing a bare patch of wall, and another showing the grand staircase with Charlotte's image proudly restored. The headline hinted at a quiet correction inside Clarence's house. Other outlets followed, some speculating about a private disagreement, others focusing on the new, more prominent placement and the inscription on the plaque. Commentators debated the meaning. Was it a subtle show of unity, a diplomatic resolution, or a pointed response from the Prince of Wales? While the tone of the coverage varied, the subtext was clear. Something had happened behind those closed doors, and it had left a mark not just on the wall, but on the story the family told the public. Inside the palace, no one rushed to confirm or deny anything. William's team released no statement. Catherine's schedule went on as normal. Camilla's office made no comment at all, but in many ways they didn't need to. The portrait's placement spoke louder than any press release could. Every visitor who climbed those stairs saw it. Every camera that captured the grand staircase in the background now included Charlotte's face framed in gold, with words that underscored her place in the family's future. It was, in its own quiet way, a message, one the public could interpret, and one the family understood completely. For William, restoring the portrait wasn't just about reversing a decision. It was about breaking a cycle he'd seen before. In the privacy of his study, away from the polished halls and the public schedule, he placed a copy of Charlotte's birthday portrait beside another photograph he kept close. A black and white image of Diana holding him as a baby. 2 pictures, 2 generations, bound by something more powerful than title or duty. The need to protect those who couldn't yet protect themselves. William knew the history. He'd watched how portraits, mentions, and appearances could be quietly reduced, how someone's place in the narrative could fade without fanfare. He'd seen it happen to his mother, and over the years, he'd watched smaller versions of that same tactic try to creep in again. But this time, the target wasn't a public figure with years of history. It was his daughter, a child who had done nothing to warrant being removed from a place of pride. And for William, that was a line that could not be crossed. The repositioned portrait, in a larger frame with a plaque declaring Charlotte, daughter of legacy, light of the future, was as much a promise as it was a display. It said, without needing explanation, that her presence was not negotiable. Those close to the family noticed another shift. Camilla's influence in certain symbolic matters, once quietly expanding, now had a clear limit, not through public confrontation, but through an unmistakable act that everyone inside the palace understood. William was willing to defend the future, even if it meant challenging the present. And the message was clear. Legacy isn't secured by holding a title. It's earned by how you protect the ones who will carry it next. In the weeks after the portrait returned, Charlotte never spoke about it much, but children have their own way of processing events, and hers came through in the little things. She began to draw more often. At first, her sketches were playful: ponies, flowers, the family dog. Then new themes began to appear: castles with tall staircases, grand hallways lined with big frames, little girls standing proudly in the middle of it all. One afternoon, Catherine found a fresh drawing on Charlotte's desk. It showed a staircase remarkably similar to the one at Clarence's house, with a single gleaming portrait at its center. The figure in the frame wore a blue dress and a wide smile. Catherine didn't need to ask who it was. She pinned the drawing to a corkboard in her dressing room. When William saw it later, he studied it for a moment, then smiled. "She's watching," he said, "and she remembers everything." It was true. Children don't always repeat what they've noticed, but they carry it with them. For Charlotte, the return of her portrait wasn't about public image or royal protocol. It was about belonging, about knowing she had a place in the story her family was telling, and that place was worth protecting. And now, thanks to the quiet but decisive actions of her parents, she knew something else too. Even when decisions were made behind closed doors, love had the power to set them right again. In the royal world, power doesn't always announce itself. It moves quietly, hidden in gestures, in invitations extended or withheld, and yes, in the portraits that line the walls. That's why this moment was never just about a frame or a photograph or a patch of bare wall in Clarence's house. It was about belonging, about a father refusing to let his child's place be questioned, about a family choosing to push back against a quiet erasure that, left unchallenged, could have become part of the story. For William, it was personal. For Catherine, it was deeply maternal. And for Charlotte, it became a lesson she will likely remember for the rest of her life. That she is seen, she is valued, and her worth isn't something someone else can hang up or take down. The portrait now hangs in a place of prominence, its inscription carrying more meaning than most visitors will ever realize. But beyond the gold frame and the polished brass plaque, its true weight lies in what it represents: a legacy defended, a message made permanent. Maybe in the years to come, Charlotte will walk past that staircase and smile, knowing her parents didn't just talk about protecting her, they acted. And maybe she'll carry that same resolve forward, protecting what matters most to her in her own way. Now, here's where I'd love to hear from you. Do you think the royal family should be more open about decisions like this? Or is the quiet, behind-the-scenes approach the better way to handle them? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. And if you want to hear more untold stories from behind the palace gates, click on the next video waiting for you right here.